All right, everyone. This is something that we should have done a long time ago. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking, yes, Ohio State football live. I bring on Tony Gerdeman on a regular basis, Steve Hillwagon, Claire Crawford, but this is like heaven. I've got all three of them at the same time. This is amazing. I'm going to go grab a cold beverage and I can just let you three talk Ohio State football and I'll just listen and learn. This is what it's all about. Tony, how you doing tonight?
Doing pretty good. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be joined by everybody.
Absolutely. Tony Gerdeman from the ozone.net. Please join him and the rest of the staff there. Mr. Steve Hillwagon, much acclaimed and esteemed Big Ten senior writer there at 247 Sports Bucknuts, and Buckeye Claire Crawford. And Claire, if we get around to naming this show, which I hesitate to do right now, it's just Ohio State Buckeyes Live. I would never steal that name, but I just want to set you up to explain to people your former podcast, and this just being the best name that I could ever imagine.
So I might need clearance from Tony, and one other guy who is the most important person to get clearance from would be Joe Dexter. But I may be okay if I think about it long and hard. I love Oh Hail No. I just think it's perfection. So I wouldn't blame you if we ended up taking on that moniker.
No. It will live in infamy. Let it rest. It has its legacy. And we will go with something else at some point. So again, our much acclaimed panel here each and every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern time. This is edition number 1. So we talk college football even in May here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So lock it right in. I'm going to hit you guys with a sledgehammer. I warned you before we started to record. Should Ryan Day have been the hire at The Ohio State University to replace Urban Meyer? I know he's a great up-and-coming head coach, but is he heavy enough for this job right now at this age? Steve?
Great question, Mark. I'm going to say yes from the standpoint of, first of all, just how great the offense has been with him at the helm the last year or two. And I think that Urban Meyer obviously had a hand in this decision, I think, in convincing Gene Smith that this is the direction that it should have gone. And I think that the idea that they were able, not only just Ryan Day and the rest of the coaches, able to maintain the infrastructure with the likes of Mark Pantoni in recruiting and Mickey Marotti in strength and conditioning and Brian Voltolini in charge of operations and everybody else. I mean, the only face that they're missing over there right now is Urban Meyer. Well, they're also missing Greg Schiano and Billy Davis and a couple of the others that didn't come back this year. But I think continuity was what they were going for, and I think they got that in spades with Ryan Day. Remains to be seen whether he's going to be the next national championship head coach at Ohio State or not. But he's been left the keys to a very impressive sports car. And now we're going to see if he can keep it up on the road and win the race.
Tony?
I thought it was interesting at the time. We would, maybe you and I have even talked about this, about Ohio State is a place where you seemingly can go get almost whoever you want, but there weren't really a lot of names out there that would seem to fit what Ohio State wants, what they do. And Urban Meyer wouldn't have stepped down if he didn't have Ryan Day there. And so if there was no Ryan Day, I think it would still be Urban Meyer. And despite the headaches and despite the stresses and all of that, it was a good time for him to step down because of Urban Meyer. And he would always use the Bob Stoops, Lincoln Riley example as one that worked out for Bob Stoops, and Urban Meyer and Bob Stoops are very close. They talk a lot. And I'm sure throughout their talks, they would talk about, did Bob Stoops have any regrets? Did he, what did he miss? And Urban Meyer was able to leave Ohio State in the hands of somebody that he trusted, somebody that, as Steve said, the infrastructure remains. And that was the defensive staff needed to be changed. What didn't need to be changed was everything you don't see. And that's where a lot of the stability comes from. Even the things like Real Life Wednesdays, where the after football programs is as much a part of this football program now as some of the coaches. And yeah, this is still the path that Urban Meyer created, and the best guy for that path, I think, is Ryan Day. Is he the best guy for Ohio State? I think you don't want to change what's been going on. So I guess the answer would be yes.
Claire, I apologize. It took me all of about 42 seconds to make a big blunder on our maiden voyage, and I should have went ladies first.
Oh,
I apologize.
it's
Step right in now.
Right. Calling me a lady is kind of like, that's kind of a stretch. So I'll take going last after these veterans ahead of me. So yeah, I think, obviously hindsight is 2020, but Ohio State fans at least were able to see what Ryan Day was able to do as an interim coach. And I don't think anyone had any expectation of Greg Schiano staying around, not only after he wasn't named interim coach during Urban Meyer's suspension, but it wasn't the first time he was overlooked for that position. So, I think that you and I talked about, and I'm glad Tony mentioned it, the Lincoln Riley example, but there are several other young up and coming coaches that are of that mold. The guys like Lincoln Riley and PJ Fleck and even Tom Herman is relatively young, not necessarily directly from the culture. Lincoln Riley, I think, is still the best example of that, Tony. But it's time for the new generation of coaches to step up. And like you mentioned, Tony, there wasn't really any big name out there and available. I don't love the idea of someone coming from the NFL to then transition into college football. It's just a different game, a different sport, and it's usually a failed experiment. It rarely ever works out, and vice versa. I mean, Greg Schiano can explain to you how both of those things work, but it definitely is. It's going to be an interesting experiment, but I think culture is the most important thing that Ryan Day brings to the table.
Urban Meyer won 91% of his games at Ohio State. He's like the third best winning percentage of all time. He has the best winning percentage of all time if we're just watching,
Correct.
Colored film videotape, not Newt Rockney, Frank Leahy, and the like from Notre Dame. Those are the two guys that surpass him in winning percentage all time. It's just crazy. So what's the standard going to be to evaluate Ryan Day, Tony? What could that possibly be?
Well, first I'll correct you. Ryan Day has the highest winning percentage in college football history at a perfect 1,000. So first, put that in your record books.
As does Cardell Jones as a quarterback.
Exactly. So in terms of like the expectations for this year is what you're asking, or like the baseline, or
yeah, what let's say he hangs around for 8 or 10 years.
Mhm.
What would be a good run at Ohio State after this? And Jim Tressel.
Well, exactly. I would say between Tressel and Urban Meyer, you can't expect to match or surpass Urban Meyer. But if you can avoid a couple of 8-4s or a 7-5 like Jim Tressel had, I think you can wedge yourself in there between Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer. And I think taking over for Urban Meyer, you're getting the program at a level that maybe no other coach has ever received it. So in that frame, I think it's okay to expect a higher winning percentage than Jim Tressel. It's just a matter of, can he win a national title like Jim Tressel, like Urban Meyer, and would one national title be a disappointment? Only one. Is only one from Urban Meyer a disappointment? Is only one from Jim Tressel a disappointment? When you look at how close they both got, and when you give Ryan Day this program at this time, would only one in say 7 or 8 years be a disappointment as well?
Tony, you stole what popped into my head about 12 seconds before you mentioned it in regards to a follow-up question. But Steve, we'll let you take this one on in regards to what we can possibly expect of Ryan Day, what's realistic, but also going to meet the expectations?
Well, I think first of all, everything starts with recruiting, and Ryan Day, it's been a pretty successful run so far as the head coach. They held on to Zach Harrison from here in Ohio. They're going to try and hold on to Paris Johnson from Cincinnati, one of the top offensive linemen out of the Midwest in the last 10 years. And he was at a combine recently, put up just some amazing numbers. Could be another, I would never say this, but another Orlando Pace type, because there was only, and there's ever only going to be one Orlando Pace, but somebody on that similar type trajectory that could be just a mainstay offensive lineman for you. So that's going to be the proof in the pudding, is can he keep Ohio's best players at home? Can he win with the talent? And certainly when you think about the history of Ohio State football, Meyer was the coach. What was
Steve has been silenced, hopefully momentarily.
It's the dark web. They have had enough.
Claire, I will let you pick it up from there. You, of course, need to know exactly what Steve was going to say to finish his comment.
There's no way. No, I think that the expectation is always going to be high at Ohio State, and it should be. I've had many a conversation about this, mainly with Michigan fans. The expectation at Michigan should be high, no matter what, no matter who steps in. And obviously, Urban set the bar high from the moment he got there. But eventually, Urban wasn't always, quote, Urban. He stepped in, and that 2012 team had something to prove. And I think that this 2019 squad is going to be have a similar mentality. And that's only going to help Ryan Day, I think. I think coaches in general that have teams that are hungry and are wanting to prove people wrong. I think the media, and we talked a little bit about it before, Mark, the media is underestimating, I think, this team. And that's not just me being a homer. I think this is me just really digging into the potential of what this team can do and maybe being an optimist. I certainly believe that having a hungry team at your helm for your maiden voyage, to steal a term from Mark, is really going to help Ryan Day out. So yeah, the expectations should be high. And I don't think that a national championship on Ryan Day's resume is going to disappoint anyone.
Steve, the internet got in your way.
Am I live now?
You are back with us.
I'll say it quickly. Tressel had 3 12-win seasons. Meyer had that 6 times in 7 years. Just an unbelievable run. And comparing Tressel to whatever came after, it's kind of an apples and oranges thing, because now you have to win the Big Ten championship game to win the conference, which is another layer that they've put in there. Also, to win a national championship, you got to win a semifinal game. So that's another layer that they've put in there. But at any rate, going to be a hard act to follow. Let's just say that.
I don't know how many people comment to me that Jim Tressel lost big bowl games all the time. And then I went, whoa, wait a minute. Let's check out the record. That's not accurate. That is not accurate. You're remembering that Florida sledgehammer that came down in 06. That resonated with so many people.
La, 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 la.
I'm sorry. We got to speak the truth
like 5
here.
losses. Yeah.
We lay it out there. I'm sorry. 41-14. I said it. Yes. It was a disaster. I think 34 points in the first half, but it's just like, that was like 8 games to College Football Nation. To a lot of people, man, Ohio State could do nothing for 3 or 4 years after that and would only lose a game, win the Big Ten, win a BCS bowl game. And it just was like, oh, they got trounced by Florida. Then they got trounced by LSU. No, Jim Tressel went like 7-3 in BCS bowl games. I might be off by 1 or 2, 5-3, something like that. Yes, he got on a roll in 2005, even after winning the national championship in 2002, and pretty much boom. I know that we've talked about it, Steve. 7-1 is Ohio State's worst. I just think this is unfathomable. Their worst Big Ten season since 2004 is 7-1.
Yeah, they've been on some type of a rampage within the conference. And, what can you say? I mean, the losses that they have are epic and spectacular in nature when you come right down to it. I mean, you think about at Penn State 3 years ago, they had a field goal and a punt blocked. You go forward, Purdue, obviously, this past year, Iowa the year before, it just cataclysmic events. When it does happen, it's a big deal.
Yes, David Greenshield in the live chat, 5-3 Trestle in BCS bowl games. Just give me a second. I will get it right off the top of my head. Just give me a second. I got there. All right, Tony. So you alluded to you touched upon this, but you didn't quite go there. I'm going to go there. When I think about Urban Meyer, and I try to put it in perspective, and the perspective from just about any angle is the guy just coached his. Well, I almost went to a literal analogy there. He just achieved at an insane rate like he did at his previous stops. Okay, but when I think about Urban Meyer's tenure, unfortunately, I think about the near misses, that he was this close to just having an insane level of success.
Well, and it starts in 2012 when he arrived, and they go 12-0, but can't play in a bowl game because of the 2011 bowl game. And then he wins 24 games in a row, and you lose to Michigan State in the 2013 Big Ten championship game, 1 game away from playing for a national title. And but like Steve said, it's so difficult now. It's almost to the point where it's like college basketball, where I don't think you can expect a team to win a national title. You can't expect. Those are unrealistic expectations because it's a 6-game tournament. You have to be hot, for at least the last 4 games. And college football isn't quite there yet, but it's so much more difficult than one bowl game to decide it all. And when you're playing in a Big Ten championship game or a conference championship game, you're not playing a joke team. Even that Michigan State team in 2013 had a heck of a defense. And, the 2015 Michigan State game. A couple of weeks ago on Twitter, I put out a poll of asking Buckeye fans which was the most painful Michigan State loss, be it the 98 or the 2013 or the 2015 game. And just the fact that Michigan State has so many of those. In that 2015 game, that was the winner of the poll. But that 2015 team still, they were fat and happy. They were a satisfied bunch. They were looking forward to the NFL. And so I think
they were
got what they deserved
enough to go 12-1 and finish number 3 in the country.
Exactly. And despite the disinterest, they were right there. And one bad defensive lapse in that game away from, going and repeating, basically.
We're not blaming it on the weather.
It was miserable down there. Steve will tell you, and I'll tell you.
I know.
It was not fun down there on the sidelines, and I was only down there for a few minutes. So it was.
I'm going to play devil's advocate and let whomever wants to chime in. It's almost going to be much better here if I just sit back and let you guys just talk Ohio State football again. I truly believe that. But Tony, I'm going to play devil's advocate, and your points are all well taken about how difficult it is to win a national championship. But we've got 130 teams in the FBS. We've got 70 in the Power 5. We've got roughly, I don't know, depending on how you view it, 8 to 12 that could win a national championship realistically any given year. Isn't there still one team that wins the national championship? So the odds are still the same.
Yeah, one team is going to do it, but it's a longer road, and it's more difficult in the past than in the past. Somebody has to win it, yes. Just like any tournament, somebody has to win it. But, but I say that, and yet Alabama and Clemson, they're always there, always, at least in the last, few years, and always is a relative term. But if 2 teams can always get there, 3 teams should always be able to get there as well, So you can't, on one hand, I'm kind of, talking out of both sides of my mouth here, where it's difficult, but other teams don't make it look so difficult.
Clemson this year's got the team that's capable of being the first team to repeat as the playoff champion, I think. And that's something we have not seen yet in this playoff era. is with these extra layers for the Big Ten, a conference championship, and then a national semifinal, and then a national championship. That hurdle is so big that it takes you a full year to get over the fact that you won the national championship the year before.
Mhm.
It was like when they won it in 2014, the calendar shifted to 2015 for everybody else in the country, but for Ohio State, they were stuck in 2014. And I think it was hard for the Ohio State staff to motivate, the guys like Elliott or Bosa, or, maybe they're not even the best examples, but maybe some of the other guys on that team who thought that they had made it when in fact they really hadn't. I mean, it was a team that was led by those guys I mentioned, and JT Barrett and other guys. It just didn't come together in 2015, and that's what we've seen for Alabama and Clemson as they've traded it back and forth. The following year has been just an uphill climb, and Clemson now has that thing around its neck that try and defend it, because it's not an easy thing. No one's repeated in the playoff era. Alabama did repeat in the BCS era before this went the other direction. But it's become so much tougher, I think. As Tony said, the climb to the top is what is so strenuous and arduous.
I don't even think anyone has been able to even be ranked number one in the beginning of the season and continue to go on and then win the national championship.
That may be a good point.
My guess is Florida State in 2013 would have been the last. That's a guess.
For some reason,
Ohio State certainly wasn't.
It's either never happened or only maybe happened a handful of times.
Oh, yeah, it's very difficult
to do.
Is maybe the most interesting, and it's the most obvious, but it's still going to be intriguing to see if Justin Fields can turn all this talent into superstar productivity on the field. Don't you think, Steve?
Well, I think the jury is still out on Fields and what he can do. I'm going to presume that he's going to be just an amazing runner because we obviously didn't get to see that in the spring. I think they're going to turn that loose on people this fall. Maybe not even in the first 2 or 3 games if they don't have to. But when they get into the Big Ten, I think it's going to be a case like Barrett, where maybe he would run 3 or 4 times against an undermanned opponent, and then as many as 15 or 20 times in some of the others. So I guess what.
Claire, this is where you step in again. No, Tony, we need you to step in for Claire to step in for Steve.
Someone is also trying to FaceTime me like 3 times in a row while I'm doing this. So I'm like trying to manage all of it again. I'm more than happy.
No respect for the voice of college football.
Right. No kidding. So I was actually thinking about it, about Fields and, with the addition of Josh Myers, who I've been pumped about, and Tony knows this because he's heard me talk about it with Joe Dexter for like the past 2 or 3 years, how pumped I am about Josh Myers. And with him potentially and most likely looking like he's going to step into that center role, Josh Myers is a much stronger run blocker potentially than he is pass blocking. And again, that's something that this O-line has been sorely missing over the last year. And as much as we're excited about seeing what this offensive line looks like, it's going to be paramount to Justin Fields' success. And I think with Josh Fields at center, that's going to be a huge, huge part of it for him. Even though, like Steve was saying and Tony was saying, it's not like Justin Fields has this proclivity for running or being able to scramble. I think it's still going to be super important to the development of this offense and making it at least not so one-dimensional. He's not Dwayne Haskins. So it's going to be really important for J.K. Dobbins and for Justin Fields and for this offensive line and probably Greg Studrawa that Josh Myers and the like are going to be able to do some run blocking for them.
The whole Justin Fields running the ball, I think it took a little bit of a hit with the loss of Matthew Baldwin, but he is too dynamic not to use in that regard. And as Steve said, we only got to see a little bit of it in the spring. He'd be wearing a black no contact jersey. So anytime he runs it, it's, they can't hit him. So he has no fear. But you still saw glimpses of what this offense could be when he runs the ball. And it's something that obviously didn't see that last year with Dwayne Haskins. And I think it impacted the entire running game. I think what we'll see this year is a much improved running game. You're talking about, and Mark, we've talked about this before, where J.K. Dobbins averaging over 7 yards a carry as a freshman. Last year is 4.6 yards per carry. Right? And exactly. And it was the worst rushing Ohio State team we've ever seen. But I think they'll get back to their old ways because Justin Fields, the threat of him running, he doesn't have to run the ball a lot, just enough to let defenses know that, yeah, I can do this and I can go 40 yards in a blink. That will keep the defensive ends from crashing on the running backs. J.K. Dobbins is a motivated dude this year. Last year, he wasn't happy about it. Every time we talked to him this spring, we would talk about what happened last year. So he's already tired of hearing about that, and there's still a full fall camp to go. So I think he's ready to get back to running the ball. The offensive line, as Claire said, even though they're replacing 4 starters, I think they're going to be meaner, tougher, stronger, and more you've got guys like Brandon Bowen, who's a fifth-year guy who was a starter 2-3 years ago and then has missed the last 2 seasons, and this is his last chance. Right. So he is going to be supremely motivated. And as Claire said, Josh Myers at center might be the strongest guy on the offensive line.
Yeah, he is.
Wyatt Davis, redshirt sophomore, who started the last couple of games last year, went through bowl camp, bowl practices as a starter, went through spring practices as a starter. So he's almost a returning starter. The concern for me, though, if we're talking about the offensive line, is Thayer Munford has been out since December with a back injury. And that continued this spring. So until I see him out there, that's a concern for me. But overall, I like the combination of this offensive line, Justin Fields running the ball or the threat of the run, and everything else that J.K. Dobbins and Master Teague, Demario McCall, all of these things these guys can do. I think they're going to be a much more improved running team, and Justin Fields is going to be a complement to that.
Let me sneak in a promo. So this is what you folks need to do here is join us on Patreon, the Voice of College Football Community. We are launching 2 different live streams. One is me responding to your viewer comments. So get set, buckle in, because I will applaud many. I will have a smile on my face, and I will shake your hand. But there are many times that I will just have to lay down the hammer and let you know how ignorant you are about college football. But it's an education. It's an education of sorts. So we appreciate 6,000 comments year to date. Last year, 36,000 right now year to date. So we appreciate your comments. And so please join us on Patreon for the Voice of College Football Community, where 1 live stream per week, I respond to your viewer comments. The other live stream per week, I will bring you on, the viewers, much like we see Claire, Steve, and Tony right here, to talk college football. How can you beat that? You talk about entertainment. I am lending my time as the voice of college football to talk to you. And
it's
then
like a graduate level course that people are enrolling in.
That's
like
it.
A 400 level course. You get 5 credit hours for this course.
Absolutely, Steve. I need you to cut a promo for me. That might have been it right there.
Graduate level.
Steve, you take off on whatever you'd like. We were talking some Justin Fields. Obviously, you started to make your comment concerning him, but any other keys?
Well, the magazines are trickling out, and I've got a selection of them right here. I've been to Kroger, our local grocery, and I've got them. And from the Ohio State perspective, for Ohio State fans who are starved to get this team back in the playoff, Street and Smith's, Athlons, and Lindy's aren't having it. Lindy's has Ohio State 7th. They have Michigan 5th. They're not even in. Athlon has Michigan 4th and Ohio State 5th. So there's 2 of the magazines that have Michigan ahead of Ohio State. And then Street and Smith's has Ohio State 5th as well. None of the 3 have Ohio State. For all this talk about going undefeated and Justin Fields, promised land, and Pat Hand, and improved defense, I think what we're seeing from these magazines is you're going to have to prove it to me and you're going to have to show me. And you're not on the level of Alabama and Clemson because those teams don't lose to teams the likes of Iowa in 2017, Penn State in 2017, Iowa in 2018, and now I'm getting my years confused.
Yeah, those are the last three.
Unranked
Got
teams,
'em.
Penn State, Iowa, and Purdue. Alabama and Clemson typically aren't losing to those teams. They may have a scare every now and then, but they generally have taken care of business the last couple of years. So they're at another level. Ohio State is the level just behind them, and it's incumbent on Ohio State to get back up at that level. And the nation is telling Columbus, Ohio, and Ohio State fans that, pump the brakes just a little bit. You're not going into the season as the favorite to win the national championship, no matter how badly you wish it to be so. It's not the case going into the season.
You're going to get some Buckeyes fans riled up here.
I'm
No,
just
I think
saying.
that's the healthiest thing for Buckeye fans to understand.
Goes to reality.
Have to manage this. The Buckeye fans are going to have to manage this expectations, and as much as expectations should be high at Ohio State, it's going to be the healthiest thing for this team to be underestimated. We talked about it just before. This needs to be a hungry team for Ryan Day to be successful. They need to have a chip on their shoulder. They need to have something to prove. Read all the magazines. This is the one time where I tell them I'm going to like under their doors at the dorm rooms, I'm going to slip all the press clippings. Like, please understand that everyone is underestimating this team. It's going to be the healthiest thing. And for Buckeye fans to manage the expectations, this might be a rough one. Like, there are question marks. Again, like we were talking about with the offensive line, there's a lot of potential and there's a lot of promise, but there are a lot of question marks, especially with depth. And in order for Ohio State fans to understand this and to be okay with this transition, it's going to be that.
I want to throw in one other thing. All these magazines have Alabama and Georgia both in the top 4, and I don't like that. I think going into the season, okay, relative strength of the teams, if that's what you're saying this is, maybe that's the case. But when one of them knocks off the other one, whenever that day comes, if it's the SEC championship game, I think the loser of that game's got to go to the back of the line. We got to get back to where what's in the bylaws of this thing really stand up to where you need to be a conference champion, or I wouldn't say need to be. I think that is something that if there's a tie, two teams are 12-1 or whatever, one of them wins a major conference championship, that matters. That's supposed to matter because you're the best team out of a 14-team group of teams and a region. And in an apples and oranges sport, I think that's got to carry more weight.
Steve, I'm going to put my scarlet and gray on for just a second because despite those losses in 17 and 18, I can make a logical case as to why Ohio State should have been selected for the playoff. They were not given the opportunity those 2 years.
18, as we've said, terrible running game and terrible defense. I don't think 18 was a national championship caliber team, but I do believe 17, you had a better shot at it. And I don't know. I mean, I think 17 was the residual of how bad you lost to Clemson in 16, but
yeah, I don't believe in that transitive property. Let's judge a team based on what happened last year. I will mention that someone by the name of Tiger Rag, so Tiger could allude to a number of teams across the country.
That's LSU.
Guessing Clemson.
It's one of the 6 Tigers in
Clemson.
the SEC.
So first, I will mention since Tiger Rag, I've never seen you comment to the channel before. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. You're obviously a Clemson fan. I would love to know how long you've been watching. Okay. It's funny because he was asking, I just joined the chat. What's going on? What are they talking about? And Tiger Rag responds by saying, I will get you up to speed on what has happened so far. Ohio State fans think they are the greatest football team that has ever been on a field or will ever be on a field. They have never lost a game.
Pretty much, but that applies for about 25 teams. So.
Yeah, right. That's Alabama fans are upset when Alabama loses. Clemson fans are upset when Clemson loses. If you're a fan base that's happy when you lose, then you're good on you, but that doesn't get you anywhere. Anger is Anger is a good thing for fan bases, I guess. But
Yes.
when we're talking about what Ohio State should be, what Ohio State should do, when you have all of the resources you need, you should make the most of those resources. And when you don't, Ohio State should not lose at Purdue. Ohio State should not lose at Iowa. Ohio State should beat Penn State when they are better than when they are. So Ohio State shouldn't lose those games. Clemson shouldn't lose to Syracuse a couple of years ago. But that's why college football is the best thing there is, because that does happen. And every week, something like that happens. If everything happens as it should, who cares? What do we have here? I mean, you've got the NBA.
The first Clemson national championship team lost to Pitt.
Yeah.
43-42, a marginal Pitt team that was fill in the blank. Iowa,
All the Pitt
Purdue.
teams are marginal.
Just the scenario was different. What did I miss there?
Except for any team that Mark May played on.
I said all the Pitt teams are marginal. Just kidding. Just
so there is an amount of luck and circumstances that go into the culmination of these seasons and the 4 teams that are selected. That particular Clemson team lost to Pitt, and they also had NC State miss a chip shot 30-yard field goal that would have beaten them in overtime, and there would have been no playoff, no national championship run, and they didn't make a play to avert disaster. They just lucked out. Now, to their credit, they finished the deal, went to the playoff, and won the games. That 2015 scenario, Ohio State, Alabama. Alabama basically played the same season Ohio State did. They just lucked out that they backdoored their way into Atlanta in the SEC championship game, and Ohio State lost to the wrong team. Ohio State, you think how ridiculous this is? They could have lost to Rutgers that year, beat Michigan State, and they would have went to the Big Ten title and went to the playoff.
Yep.
They lost to the wrong team.
Yeah.
Who you lose to and when. These losses to the Western Division, as long as you only have one and then clean up in the East.
And Mark, you and I have talked about this in the past, where Alabama always gets the benefit of the doubt. And that's something that Ohio State has missed over these last few years, getting that benefit of the doubt. But the reason Alabama gets that is because there is no 55-21 or 49-20.
Right.
And as long as there are none of those, you can get that benefit of the doubt. And when there are, you're going to be hard pressed to have those things forgiven. And the Buckeyes have run into that. And the easiest way to keep to not have that problem is to not lose those games in that fashion. And if they're just close losses, that would be a huge help for Ohio State. It's the blowout situation that is inexcusable.
And I think the conferences are always going to be weighted. Everybody's got a conference, but the conferences are always going to be weighted. And obviously, generally, the media and the coaches favor SEC. And when there's cannibalism in the SEC or parity in the SEC, it tends to be rewarded, as opposed to in the Big Ten. If you're losing to another Big Ten team, then it's just, the Big Ten is top heavy and they shouldn't have lost those games. So it's really difficult to put those things side by side and say, yes, those are the same. But like I said, it's in favor if Alabama loses to another SEC team, but if Ohio State loses to a Big Ten team. And again, like you said, it's the manner and the fashion in which they lose. They shouldn't have lost those games, and they shouldn't have been blowouts. There are 2 ways a coach is going to get judged. They either lose the big game or lose the small game. And it's going to depend on what the college football landscape looks like in order to how bad that is. So one of the 2 is going to happen. You're going to have losses.
Absolutely. That's the flawed system that we have, the selection process that we have. It's not an objective system, so the wins and the losses have to be evaluated and rated. And certainly, Tony, your point is absolutely on point, that under this system, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee has to differentiate wins and losses. And when you're losing to decent teams by 29 and 31 points, it's inexcusable.
If the season is an entire season-long interview process and you bomb one of the questions in that interview, it's going to be really hard for the people making that decision to ignore that particular answer. And when you do it 2 interviews in a row, 2 seasons in a row, now you get this stain on you. And you look at this upcoming schedule, and I think you look at Nebraska, the road game to Nebraska, the road game at Northwestern, as particularly the Nebraska game. That is the most Iowa, most Purdue-like situation for this team this year. And I'd say it's even more dangerous because there are such high expectations. The momentum in Nebraska right now is so high, and there are so many expectations. And maybe that's a good thing for Ohio State, and that they won't be caught off guard. Of course, we thought they wouldn't be caught off guard at Purdue based on what happened at Iowa the year before. But when you look at the schedule, and as you're like, well, what game can this, where's the blowout going to be this year? That Nebraska game is what you look at. And it's pretty early in the season. And so Ohio State will have a chance to make a statement right then that that's not who we are. That's Urban Meyer's program. We're so far beyond that now.
And I think another reason that blowouts get deemed as bad as they are, or in the grand algorithm of who makes it to this college football playoff, is because if it's a team like Ohio State that's just been running rampant through their schedule, and there comes a time where there's a blowout, it's perceived as a team mentality or a culture issue when there's a blowout. It's not necessarily that the hat on the field didn't measure up that day, because we know that's not the case. We know that Ohio State team was more talented than that Iowa team, but it came down to a mentality in a blowout. And people are forecasting in the future, well, if they cannot be mentally weak in a game against Iowa, how are they going to stack up against the Clemsons and the Alabamas of the world? And I think that's truly the reason why people really downgrade these blowouts.
There you have it. Tony Gerdeman from the Ozone, Steve Hellwagen from Bucknuts, and Buckeye Claire Crawford. And I will give you guys any kind of parting shots. We are in May, so they're obviously not urgent. So we appreciate you jumping on the line. But if you have anything else to say, certainly we will take your last comments.
I'll just throw out that it looks like Ohio State's on the verge of getting a major commitment from Julian Fleming from Pennsylvania, wide receiver. I guess that's supposed to come down on Friday, 2 days from now. And he could pick Ohio State over Penn State, which, the rich keep getting richer. And when you take Pennsylvania's best players, they took a quarterback out of there recently. And now if they get Fleming, that would be huge. And they're also in the running on Marvin Harrison Jr. as well, another outstanding Pennsylvania player. So to me, what Penn State's done has been fabulous, but this kind of short circuits some of that if Ohio State's able to go in there and take their best players away from them.
I'll add that we keep talking about Ohio State's offense, but I think to this point it's okay to assume it's going to be very, very good, and really how far this team goes maybe isn't about Justin Fields. It's about the defense and the kind of a remanufacturing of what Jeff Hafley and Greg Madison and Larry Johnson have done with the Ohio State defense, because it's not been an Ohio State defense for a while now. And if this team is going to play 15 games this year, it's going to be up to the defense to make sure that there is no 55 points given up or 49 points this season. And I think the offense will be fine. I do have high expectations for the defense, but I also think that's where this season will hinge.
I don't have too much. I think, I touched on it a little bit earlier about the offensive line. We'll kind of see, maybe for another day, we can talk about how warm Greg Strudau's seat might be if this season doesn't quite turn out the way we expect offensively. I think if there's any link on that team to the performance of the offense, that may be it. So excited to flesh that out going forward. And thank you again for having me on.
Absolutely. We are so excited about the start of this series. Ohio State Football Talk live each and every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Tony Gerdeman, Steve Hellwagon, Claire Crawford, and maybe some others in the future. And thank you so much. We will break down some positions as we get closer to August camp, and certainly check out the schedule as well. And then I can also serve up some of my favorite off-season questions that involve, as Steve and I talked about a few weeks ago, the most excruciating losses, the greatest wins, changes to the program. What would you do if you were running Ohio State football and would make a change? What would you do to change Big Ten football or college football nationally, the playoff? There's a lot of things that can be changed. So there we go. All of you, thank you so much for making this a tremendous start to our Ohio State Live segment.
Thank you once again.
Glad to be a part of it.
Yep.
Glad we could do it.